Get out now. You're not welcome here. Call the security to get this woman out of here. The manager's voice was absolutely explosive, echoing through the luxury car dealership like a thunderclap. His face was beet red, veins bulging in his neck as he screamed at a black woman in casual clothes. The tension in that showroom was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Customers were staring in shock. Employees were frozen in place. And this woman he was yelling at, she was standing there with a calmness that was absolutely chilling. Her name was Zora, and she responded with ice-cold precision. You have no idea what you just did. The way she said it sent shivers down your spine. There was no screaming, no hysteria, just pure, controlled fury that was somehow more terrifying than any shouting match. And that was enough to know a line had been crossed. Have you ever been discriminated against? Hit the subscribe button now and type karma in the comments because what you're about to see proves that karma is very, very real. The black woman was Zora Thompson, and at 42 years old, she had built one of the most successful automotive empires in America, completely from scratch. We're talking about a self-made millionaire who owned not just one, not just 5, but 12 luxury car dealerships across the state. The Thompson Automotive Group was her baby, her life's work, and that day, she watched her employees destroy everything she stood for. Zora had just acquired Prestige Motors in Beverly Hills, her newest and most expensive addition to the Thompson Automotive Group. This wasn't just any dealership. We're talking about a place that sold cars worth more than most people's houses, catering to Hollywood celebrities, tech billionaires, and old money families who thought six-figure purchases were pocket change. But Zora had heard whispers, rumors that made her stomach turn. Former customers were quietly mentioning things that didn't sit right with her. Stories about being treated differently based on how they looked, what they wore, or what neighborhood they came from. These weren't loud complaints or angry reviews. They were subtle hints that suggested something was seriously wrong with the culture at her newest acquisition. That's when Zora decided to do something that would either confirm her worst fears or put her mind at ease. She was going to test her own employees, but not in the way they expected. This wasn't going to be some corporate inspection with advance notice and prepared presentations. No, this was going to be real, raw, and completely authentic. So Zora came up with a plan that was as brilliant as it was risky. She was going to go undercover in her own dealership. Now, you have to understand how crazy this idea was. Zora Thompson was used to walking into rooms and commanding instant respect. She was used to $1,000 business suits, first-class treatment, and people jumping to attention when she spoke. Her usual daily uniform consisted of designer clothes that cost more than most people made in a month, jewelry that caught light from across the room, and a presence that screamed success from a mile away. But not that day. That day, she was going to become someone completely different. Zora went to the back of her walk-in closet and pulled out clothes she hadn't worn in years. Old blue jeans with worn spots at the knees, sneakers that had seen better days, and a faded t-shirt that looked like it came from a discount store. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Gone was the polished CEO, replaced by someone who looked like she might be struggling to make ends meet. Think about what Zora was risking there. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or bad customer service. If her suspicions were right, if her employees were actually discriminating against customers based on appearance or race, it could destroy everything she had worked for. The Thompson Automotive Group's reputation was built on integrity and respect. Any hint of discrimination could lead to lawsuits, boycotts, and the complete destruction of the brand she had spent decades building. But Zora couldn't live with the uncertainty. She had to know the truth, even if that truth was going to be painful. The final touch to her disguise was perhaps the most important decision of all. Instead of driving one of her usual vehicles, the Bentley Continental GT she used for business meetings, the Tesla model she drove around town, or even the classic 1967 Mustang she kept for weekend drives, Zora chose her 2015 Honda Civic. Now, there's nothing wrong with a Honda Civic. It's reliable, economical, and practical. But at a luxury dealership, where the cheapest car on the lot cost more than most people's annual salary, showing up in a 9-year-old Civic was like wearing a neon sign that said, "I probably can't afford to be here." And that was exactly the point. As Zora pulled into the parking lot of Prestige Motors in her modest Honda Civic, wearing clothes that made her look like any regular person just trying to buy a car, she had no idea she was about to witness behavior so shocking, so blatantly discriminatory that it would force her to make decisions that would change lives forever. The test was about to begin, and her employees had no clue they were about to be judged by the very person who signed their paychecks. The moment Zora Thompson walked through those pristine glass doors of Prestige Motors, her worst nightmares about what might be happening in her own dealership were about to become horrifying reality. What she was about to experience in the next 20 minutes shocked her to her core and proved that sometimes the people you trust most were capable of betraying everything you stand for. In the luxury showroom, there were polished marble floors that gleamed like mirrors, crystal chandeliers hanging from 20th ceilings, and cars so expensive they looked like works of art. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces were displayed like precious jewels, each one worth more than most people's houses. The whole place screamed money, exclusivity, and success. But the moment Zora stepped inside, wearing her disguise of worn jeans and old sneakers, it was like she had become completely invisible. And I mean completely invisible. There were 3 salespeople on the floor, and every single one of them was busy with customers. The salespeople were practically falling over themselves to help these customers, laughing at their jokes, offering them coffee, treating them like royalty. Zora stood there for a full 3 minutes, 3 entire minutes, and not one person acknowledged her existence. She watched salespeople walk right past her, make eye contact, and then look away like she wasn't even there. The disrespect was so blatant, so obvious that it was actually stunning. Finally, Zora approached the reception desk where a young woman named Jessica was sitting. Now, Jessica looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Perfectly styled blonde hair, makeup that probably took an hour, and clothes that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. She was typing on her computer, clearly aware that someone was standing in front of her desk, but she didn't even bother to look up. Zora waited patiently for almost a full minute before Jessica finally glanced up with the most dismissive, condescending look you had ever seen. Without any greeting, without any attempt at customer service, Jessica immediately assumed the worst about why Zora was there. "If you're here about a job, applications are online," Jessica said in a tone that was so cold and dismissive it could have frozen water. She didn't say hello, didn't ask how she could help, didn't show even the most basic level of professional courtesy. She just assumed that a black woman in casual clothes must be looking for work, not looking to buy a car. Think about how insulting that was. Zora owned this entire dealership. She employed Jessica. She signed the paychecks that kept this place running. And she was being treated like some random person off the street looking for a job. But Zora kept her cool. Remember, this was a test, and she needed to see just how deep this discrimination went. So, she responded politely, professionally, the way any potential customer should be treated. "I'm interested in looking at cars." Jessica looked Zora up and down like she was inspecting a piece of trash that had somehow wandered into her pristine showroom. Her voice dripped with condescension as she said, "Honey, our cheapest car is $40,000. Maybe try the used lot down the street." The audacity was breathtaking. But here's what made this even worse. Jessica said, "honey," in that fake, patronizing way that was designed to make someone feel small and stupid. She was talking to Zora like she was a child who had wandered into an adult store by mistake. Zora was standing there processing what had just happened when things were about to get so much worse because that's when Brad Wilson made his entrance. And this man was about to show us levels of arrogance and discrimination that made Jessica look polite by comparison. Brad Wilson was 38 years old and he carried himself like he owned the world. He had that slicked back hair, expensive suit, and swagger that screamed, "I think I'm better than everyone else." This was a man who had made a career out of kissing up to rich customers while looking down on everyone else. And he was about to show Zora exactly what kind of person she had accidentally hired. Brad had been watching this interaction from across the showroom, and he approached with this fake smile that didn't reach his eyes. His whole demeanor screamed superiority and condescension as he said, "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." He didn't introduce himself, didn't welcome her to the dealership, didn't show any genuine interest in helping her. He immediately assumed there was a misunderstanding, as if Zora being there was some kind of mistake that needed to be corrected. But Zora wasn't backing down. She had been in business long enough to recognize a test when she saw one, and she was determined to see just how far her employees would go. So she responded calmly and clearly, "I'd like to see your luxury sedans." This was where Brad's true colors really started to show. Instead of doing what any decent salesperson would do, which was show her the cars and try to make a sale, Brad put on this fake smile that was so transparent it was almost insulting. His response was a masterclass in discrimination disguised as business protocol. "Those require serious buyers with pre-approved financing," he said. And the way he emphasized serious buyers made it crystal clear that he didn't consider Zora to be one. Think about how ridiculous this was. Zora had just asked to look at cars, not buy one, not take one for a test drive. Just look at them. And Brad was already demanding proof that she could afford them. Other customers in the showroom were starting to notice what was happening. They were watching this black woman in casual clothes being given the runaround by the staff. And instead of looking embarrassed or uncomfortable about the obvious discrimination, some of them were actually staring like Zora was some kind of entertainment. The humiliation was deliberate. It was public, and it was designed to make Zora feel so uncomfortable that she would just leave on her own. Brad knew exactly what he was doing. He was putting on a show for his real customers, demonstrating that he protected their exclusive environment from people who didn't belong. But Zora wasn't going anywhere. She had seen enough to know that her worst fears were true, but she needed to document just how bad things really were. So she decided to push the test even further. Zora walked over to a stunning BMW sedan with a price tag that would have made most people's eyes water, $85,000. It was sleek, black, and absolutely gorgeous. The kind of car that represented success and achievement. She examined it carefully, running her hand along the smooth paint, peering through the windows, showing genuine interest and appreciation for the craftsmanship. That's when Brad completely lost his mind. Instead of seeing a potential customer showing interest in an expensive car, Brad saw a threat to his precious showroom. He stormed over with an expression of pure outrage, like Zora had just committed some kind of crime by daring to touch one of his vehicles. I'm going to need to see 3 forms of identification and recent bank statements before we can discuss this vehicle. He demanded, his voice loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. 3 forms of ID and bank statements. For a woman who just wanted to look at a car, this wasn't standard procedure. This was discrimination, pure and simple. But Brad wasn't done humiliating Zora. Oh no, he was just getting started. He called over the security guard over Zora like she was some kind of threat that needed to be monitored. The security guard's name was Tom, and he was a big guy with the kind of intimidating presence that was designed to make people nervous. Tom walked over with his hand resting on his radio, like he was ready to call for backup if this situation got out of hand. Just in case, Brad said to Tom, but he said it loud enough for Zora to hear. Just in case, what? The message was clear. Zora was being treated like a potential criminal, not a potential customer. But then something happened that exposed the discrimination in the most brutal, undeniable way possible. A well-dressed white customer walked through the front door, and the transformation in the staff's behavior was so dramatic, it was like watching a completely different business. This new customer was wearing an expensive suit, polished shoes, and a watch that probably cost more than most people's cars. The moment he stepped inside, it was like someone had flipped a switch. Jessica, the same receptionist who had treated Zora like trash, instantly sprang to attention with a warm, welcoming smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Prestige Motors. How can we help you today?" Her voice was completely different. Friendly, professional, genuinely interested in helping. One of the salespeople who had completely ignored Zora when she walked in immediately approached the new customer with coffee, a comfortable chair, and genuine enthusiasm about showing him around the showroom. Zora watched this double standard play out in real time, and you could see her jaw tightening with controlled fury. She was witnessing the exact same staff treat 2 customers in completely opposite ways based on nothing but appearance and race. The contrast was so stark, so obvious that it was actually painful to watch. The white customer asked to see the same BMW that Zora was interested in. Instead, the salesperson practically ran to get the keys, eager to let this serious buyer sit inside the car, start it up, and take it for a test drive. No questions asked, no proof of income required, no suspicious looks or whispered conversations with security. That's when Brad delivered what he thought would be his final blow. He approached Zora with that same fake smile and said, "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of the other locations." The pause before other locations was deliberate and loaded with meaning. He was essentially telling her to go somewhere else, somewhere that catered to her kind of people. It was segregation disguised as customer service. Discrimination wrapped up in polite language. This was the moment when 30 years of building a business based on respect and equality came crashing down around Zora's ears. She was watching her own employees destroy everything she believed in, and she had reached her breaking point. That's when security guard Tom made the worst decision of his life. He lunged forward and roughly grabbed Zora's arm like she was some kind of criminal. "Come on, lady. Time to go." His grip was aggressive, disrespectful, and completely out of line. But Zora wasn't having it. She ripped her arm away with surprising force. "Take your hands off me. I'll walk out myself." The power in her voice stopped everyone cold. Even in this moment of complete humiliation, she carried herself like royalty. Brad thought he had won. His voice dripped with smugness as he delivered what he believed was the killing blow. "And don't come back unless you can afford to shop here." The arrogance was absolutely sickening. But then something happened that changed everything. Zora stopped at the doorway and slowly turned around. For the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that should have made every person in that room run for cover. Her voice was deadly quiet. "Oh, I'll be back very soon." The way she said those words sent chills down your spine. There was a promise in her voice, a certainty that made you realize Brad had no idea who he had just messed with. The entire dealership fell silent as she walked out, leaving everyone wondering what had just happened. She was physically escorted out of her own dealership like a common criminal. Zora Thompson sat in her modest Honda Civic in the parking lot, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Her hands were shaking, not from fear or embarrassment, but from pure, concentrated rage that had been building up for the past hour. If you were in Zora's shoes, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. In the car, Zora reached for her phone, and her first call was to Sarah, her assistant. When Sarah picked up, Zora's voice was deadly calm. The kind of calm that came right before a storm that was going to level everything in its path. "Sarah, yes, they failed the test spectacularly," Zora said. And you could hear the controlled fury in every word. This wasn't just poor customer service or a few rude employees. This was a complete and total failure of everything the Thompson Automotive Group was supposed to represent. Zora had gone into this test suspecting there might be some problems with customer service, maybe some unconscious bias or lack of training. She had been hoping to find minor issues that could be fixed with better management and diversity training. Instead, she discovered systematic, deliberate, institutionalized discrimination that went against everything she had spent her career building. But then, Zora said something that should have made Brad Wilson and his team absolutely terrified. "Prepare the termination paperwork." Those 4 words represented the end of careers, the destruction of livelihoods, and the complete dismantling of the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester in her newest acquisition. This wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist or a stern talking to. Heads were going to roll, and Zora was sharpening the axe. But as Zora sat in her car, processing the magnitude of what she had just experienced through the large glass windows of the showroom, Zora watched as another customer entered the dealership. And her heart immediately sank because she knew exactly what was about to happen. The new customer was Jennifer, a young black professional who looked to be in her late 20s. Jennifer was beautifully dressed in a sharp business suit, carrying herself with confidence and purpose. Clearly someone who had worked hard to achieve success in her career. Jennifer represented everything that should have been celebrated. Young, ambitious, successful, and ready to reward her hard work with a luxury purchase. She was exactly the kind of customer any legitimate business should have been thrilled to serve. But Zora knew that none of that was going to matter to the staff inside Prestige Motors. And she was absolutely right. From her vantage point in the parking lot, Zora watched in horror as the exact same pattern of discrimination began to unfold all over again. Jessica, the receptionist who had treated Zora like garbage, barely glanced up when Jennifer approached her desk. The same salespeople who had ignored Zora completely continued their conversations with existing customers, acting like Jennifer didn't exist. But it got worse. So much worse. Zora watched as Brad Wilson noticed Jennifer and approached her with that same fake smile and condescending attitude. She couldn't hear the conversation from outside, but she didn't need to. The body language told the entire story. Brad was using the same dismissive gestures, the same patronizing tone, the same systematic process of humiliation that he had used on Zora just minutes earlier. This was the moment when Zora realized that what had happened to her wasn't personal. It was policy. This wasn't about one bad employee having a bad day or a single incident of poor judgment. This was systematic, institutionalized discrimination that happened every single day in her dealership, and she had been completely unaware of it. Jennifer was being put through the exact same degrading process that Zora had just endured. The demands for identification, the questions about financing, the subtle suggestions that she might be more comfortable shopping somewhere else. It was all happening again, like some horrible recurring nightmare. Zora watched as other customers in the showroom, the well-dressed, wealthy-looking customers, were treated with respect and courtesy, while Jennifer was made to feel unwelcome and out of place. The double standard was so blatant, so systematic, that it was clear this had been going on for months, maybe years. That's when something inside Zora snapped. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about basic human dignity. This was about every young professional like Jennifer, who had walked into that showroom with dreams of rewarding their success with a luxury purchase, only to be treated like they didn't belong. This was about every customer who had been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. Zora quietly started recording on her phone, documenting the discrimination that was playing out in front of her. She was gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for the reckoning that was about to unfold. Every gesture, every dismissive look, every moment of disrespect was being captured for posterity. But then Zora did something that signaled this situation was about to escalate to a level that Brad Wilson and his staff never could have imagined. She sent a text message that contained just 8 words, but those 8 words were about to change everything. It's worse than we thought. Initiate Protocol 7. Protocol 7. That phrase should have struck fear into the heart of anyone who worked for the Thompson Automotive Group because it represented the nuclear option, the absolute last resort that Zora had hoped she would never have to use. This was the protocol reserved for situations so severe, so damaging to the company's reputation and values, that it required immediate and decisive action at the highest levels. Within minutes of sending that text, Zora's phone started buzzing with responses. Her legal team, her human resources department, her regional managers, they all knew what Protocol 7 meant, and they were all preparing for what was about to be the most dramatic corporate house cleaning in the company's history. Then she made another call, and this one should have made Brad Wilson's blood run cold if he had any idea what was happening. Call the regional manager. Tell him it's urgent. The regional manager, not a local supervisor, not some middle management figure, but the person who oversaw multiple locations, the person who had the power to make decisions that affected entire districts. Zora wasn't playing games anymore. She was calling in the big guns, and something massive was about to go down. After about 15 minutes of phone calls, Zora disappeared. She drove away in her Honda Civic, leaving the staff to think they had won, that they had successfully protected their precious showroom from someone who didn't belong. Brad probably felt pretty good about himself, maybe even told the story to other staff members about how he had handled that difficult customer. But then something happened that was going to start making Brad very, very nervous. About 30 minutes later, a figure approached the front entrance of Prestige Motors. And this time, everything about the situation was different. The person walking through those doors was wearing a perfectly tailored business suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The shoes were expensive Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine. The jewelry was subtle, but clearly expensive. Everything about this person screamed success, authority, and money. It was Zora, but she was completely transformed. Gone was the woman in worn jeans and old sneakers. In her place was someone who looked like they could buy the entire dealership without breaking a sweat. The confidence in her walk, the authority in her bearing, the quiet power that radiated from every step. This was a completely different person than the one they had thrown out less than an hour ago. When Zora spoke, her voice had changed too. It wasn't the polite, patient tone of someone trying to be a good customer. This was the voice of someone who was used to boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and making decisions that affected thousands of people. This was the voice of power, and it was about to shake the foundation of everything Brad thought he knew. "I'd like to speak with your district manager," Zora said. And the way she said it made it clear this wasn't a request. It was a command. Brad looked up from whatever he was doing. And for a split second, there was something familiar about this woman, but he couldn't quite place it. And his arrogance wouldn't let him consider that the person he had just humiliated could possibly be standing in front of him looking like $1 million. "Look, lady, I thought we settled this." "You can't just keep coming back," Brad said, and the dismissive tone in his voice proved that he still didn't understand what he was dealing with. He thought this was the same person he had thrown out, maybe dressed up to try to impress him, maybe thinking that better clothes would get her better treatment. He had no idea that he was about to receive a lesson in consequences that would haunt him for the rest of his career. But then Zora said something that should have made Brad's blood freeze in his veins. "Tell him Zora is here." Brad's confusion was obvious. "Zora who?" "Listen, I'm calling the police." But instead of being intimidated or backing down, Zora just smiled. And this wasn't a friendly smile or a nervous smile. This was the kind of smile that should have made everyone in that showroom run for cover. "He'll know," she said. And those two words contained more confidence and certainty than Brad had shown in this entire interaction. Soon, the district manager came bursting through those glass doors like his life depended on it, and everything about his entrance screamed panic and desperation. This was Robert Chen, a man who oversaw multiple dealerships across the region. Someone who was used to handling high-pressure situations and managing million-dollar operations. But right then, he looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Robert was practically running across that marble floor, his expensive suit wrinkled from rushing, sweat beading on his forehead. Despite the perfect air conditioning in the showroom, his eyes were scanning the room, frantically searching for someone. And when he spotted Zora standing there in her business attire, something incredible happened. Robert Chen, this powerful district manager who commanded respect throughout the automotive industry, went absolutely pale. The color drained from his face like someone had just told him his worst nightmare had come true. His mouth opened and closed a few times like he was trying to speak, but couldn't find the words. And then in a voice that was trembling with fear and respect, Robert said something that was about to change everything. "Miss Thompson, I had no idea you were—" Miss Thompson, not ma'am, not lady, not some dismissive title that Brad had been using. Miss Thompson said with the kind of reverence and terror reserved for someone who had the power to end your career with a phone call. But before Robert could finish his sentence, Brad Wilson made what might have been the biggest mistake of his entire life. He interrupted the district manager, his boss's boss, with the kind of arrogance that was about to cost him everything. "Thompson? Wait, how do you know this troublemaker?" Brad said, and the disrespect in his voice was absolutely breathtaking. He had just called someone that the district manager was clearly terrified of a troublemaker. He had just dismissed someone that his superior was treating with obvious deference and fear. This was the moment when observant viewers started putting the pieces together. The phone calls, the mysterious confidence, the way Zora had commanded respect from people who weren't even in the room. It was all starting to make sense. Thompson. That name should have meant something in the automotive industry. That name should have struck fear into the hearts of anyone who worked in luxury car sales. But Brad was still clueless. Even with all the evidence mounting around him, even with his district manager looking like he was about to faint, Brad still didn't understand what he was dealing with. Robert Chen looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear forever. He was watching his regional manager insult someone who clearly had power over both of them, and he knew that careers were about to be destroyed. His voice was shaky as he tried to do damage control, but it was way too late for that. Then Zora spoke, and her voice cut through the tension like a knife. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't emotional. She wasn't dramatic. She was speaking with the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing and pay attention. "Robert, I'd like you to observe how your staff treats potential customers," she said. And those words should have made everyone in that showroom absolutely terrified. Robert Chen realized exactly what was happening, and the terror in his eyes was absolutely palpable. This had been a test. Zora Thompson, whoever she really was, had come into this dealership to test how the staff treated customers, and they had failed spectacularly. The sweat was pouring down Robert's face now as he realized that he was witnessing a disaster that was going to have consequences throughout the entire organization. But here's where things got really incredible. Because Zora wasn't done playing with Brad Wilson, she was about to give him one more chance to dig his own grave even deeper. Zora turned to Brad with that same calm confidence and said, "I'm still interested in that BMW." She was giving Brad an opportunity to redeem himself, to show that maybe the discrimination was just a misunderstanding, that maybe he could treat customers properly when he understood who he was dealing with. It was a test within a test, and Brad was about to fail it in the most spectacular way possible. But Brad Wilson, even with his district manager standing right there looking like he was about to have a panic attack, even with all the warning signs flashing around him like emergency lights, still didn't get it. His response proved that the discrimination wasn't just poor judgment or a bad day. It was who he really was at his core. "Ma'am, after your behavior earlier," Brad started to say, and the audacity was absolutely mind-blowing. He was about to blame Zora for his discriminatory behavior. He was going to suggest that somehow she was responsible for being treated like garbage in her own dealership. But Zora cut him off with 3 words that should have made every discriminatory manager in America break out in a cold sweat. "My behavior? Let's talk about behavior." The way she said it was absolutely chilling. There was no anger, No raised voice, no emotional outburst, just cold, calculated fury, delivered with surgical precision. She was about to dissect every single thing that Brad and his staff had done wrong, and she was going to do it in front of his boss while building a case that would end his career. Zora Thompson reached into her perfectly tailored jacket with the calm, calculated precision of someone who was about to detonate a nuclear bomb in the middle of that pristine showroom. Her fingers closed around a small piece of paper that was going to change the lives of everyone in that building forever. It was just a business card, nothing fancy, nothing dramatic. But what was printed on that card was going to destroy Brad Wilson's entire understanding of reality. She placed it on the marble counter between herself and Brad with a soft click that echoed through the showroom like thunder. The sound was so quiet, so simple, but it carried the weight of absolute devastation for everyone who had been treating her like garbage for the past hour. "I'm Zora Thompson, CEO of Thompson Automotive Group," she said, and her voice was steady, calm, and absolutely terrifying in its quiet authority. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute that you could have heard a whisper from 50 feet away. Every conversation stopped. Every movement froze. Every breath caught in throats as the magnitude of what she had just revealed sank into the minds of everyone present. CEO. The woman they had just discriminated against, humiliated and physically thrown out of the building, was the head of their entire company.